They said it so simply, so sweetly, like they were saving me from trouble. "We're just keeping it small this year, Mom. Nothing big. Don't fuss." But it's the way Joanna said it. Breezy, half distracted, like canceling me was no more meaningful than changing the tablecloth. So I didn't argue. I said, "Of course, honey," and hung up. Then I stood in the kitchen, alone, my thumb still resting on the end call button, while the silence filled every room of my house like fog. Outside, frost clung to the corners of the windows, but inside, I was sweating from the oven heat. The cranberry pie, my cranberry pie, was already cooling on the sill, steam curling from the golden crust like it hadn't heard the news yet. I'd woken at 6 to make it, out of habit more than hope. I even used the real nutmeg. The house smelled like holidays. I set the table anyway. One place, my nicest plate. A cloth napkin folded into a triangle, just like I used to show the grandkids when they were small and eager to help. The crystal glass I never use. The one I keep wrapped in newspaper in the china cabinet because it was my mother's, and I'm always afraid I'll break it. Tick, tick, tick. The kitchen clock was the only voice in the room now. At noon, I sat down. My fork touched the edge of the plate and paused. I didn't eat. Not yet. Instead, I scrolled through my phone, slow, deliberate swipes across the glowing screen. There we were, Thanksgiving past, photos of messy tables, little hands in mashed potatoes, Henry grinning with a gravy mustache. Joanna, arms wrapped around her brother, both of them young again in the kitchen light. Back then, the house pulsed with life. Back then, they called me the glue. Now I'm just unstuck. A buzz broke the quiet, the phone vibrating across the table like it, too, was uneasy. A group text from Joanna's number. "Happy Thanksgiving, everyone." No greeting, no check-in, just a prepackaged sentiment sent to me and, I assumed, every other convenient recipient. I replied with a turkey emoji. No one answered. I tried calling, just to say hello, to hear a voice. Joanna's voicemail, cheerful and clipped. I left a message. "Hi, sweetie. Just checking in. Hope the turkey turned out. Love you." I didn't mention the pie, or the fact that my candle was already lit, or that the second chair across from me was empty, just like last year, just like the one before that. I cut myself a slice, ate slowly. The crust was perfect this year, and that's when I did it. That's when I opened Instagram, and there it was, the photo. Not a post, no, a tagged photo, one I was never meant to see. Joanna's dining room, my tablecloth. I'd know that lace trim anywhere, the one I gave her for her wedding shower. Her dining room, filled with faces, not just family, neighbors, friends, her yoga partner, her husband's boss, all smiling, all toasting. And there, right in the center of the spread, surrounded by candles and laughter and people I didn't even recognize, was my cranberry pie. The label still had my handwriting on it. I stared at the photo until my vision blurred, not from tears, but from something heavier, something like understanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mix-up. It was intentional. They had a place for my recipe, but not for me. It started with the phone call about a week before Thanksgiving. I was standing in the kitchen, hands damp from rinsing the teacups I'd taken out, just in case someone dropped by. Joanna's name lit up on the caller ID. I answered quickly, drying my hands on the dish towel, heart lifting, just a little. "Hi, sweetie." Her voice was warm, but rushed. She was in the car. I could hear the turn signal clicking in the background. "Hey, Mom. Just wanted to check in. Quick thing. For Thanksgiving this year, we're keeping it super low-key, okay?" "Oh?" I said lightly, pretending I hadn't already bought the cranberries. "Who's coming?" "Well, just us. You know, me, Ben, the kids. We're doing a chill day. Just the four of us." I nodded, though she couldn't see. "Of course. That sounds nice." "It's just been such a year," she added, the kind of sentence that sounds like a reason, but isn't. "We all need a breather." I felt my thumb rub absently at a scratch in the countertop, the one that's been there since Henry dropped the carving knife 3 Thanksgivings ago. "I understand," I said, even though part of me didn't. Joanna let out a relieved exhale. "Thanks, Mom. I knew you'd get it. Oh, and..." She paused, the turn signal still ticking. "Maybe skip the pie this year? I know you love making it, but we're going simple. No pressure." I almost smiled. Well, it wouldn't be Thanksgiving without the cranberry pie. She gave a soft chuckle. "You and that pie." The call ended with a quick, "Love you," and then static. I stood there for a moment. Just stood. The dish towel still in my hand, the window showing nothing but gray sky and the neighbor's dormant rose bushes. In that moment, I wasn't angry. Not yet. It wasn't that kind of hurt. It was quieter. A hollowing, almost, like the wind had blown through me and taken something with it. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the store. Just for bread and eggs, I told myself. But somehow the real vanilla extract made its way into my cart. And the oranges. And the extra sugar. At home, I set the ingredients on the counter and didn't touch them. Not yet. The next day, I called Henry just to say hello. He picked up on the 4th ring. "Hey, Ma," he said, the background noise of a video game or sports commentary bleeding through. "I just wanted to check in," I said. "How's Emma's piano practice going?" "Oh yeah, good. She's doing that winter recital thing." He paused. "What's up?" "Nothing really," I said, shifting the phone to my other ear. "Just wondering what your plans are for Thursday." "Ah, we're heading to Joanna's, actually," he said casually. "Didn't she tell you?" "Oh, no, not exactly." I leaned against the kitchen counter. The laminate felt cold through my sleeve. "Yeah, she's doing a little thing. Nothing big, just a few people." I heard the squeak of the couch on his end, like he was leaning back, relaxed. "Well," I said carefully, "she told me it was just her family." A beat of silence. "Yeah, well, it's last minute, I guess. Anyway, I think we're bringing rolls or something." "I see." He didn't notice the weight of the words. Or maybe he did and didn't know what to do with it. "Okay, Ma, I've got to run. Emma needs help finding her shoes. Love you." "Love you too, Henry." The line went dead. I stayed there, the hum of the refrigerator louder than usual. That evening, I pulled the pie dish from the high cupboard, the heavy glass one with the fluted edges. It still had a faint pink stain from last year's cranberries. I washed it gently and set it on the stove to dry. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't ask to be included. I just prepared, quietly, as I always had. A few nights later, I joined Joanna on a video call. She had asked to check in, which usually meant going over her calendar or asking if I'd reviewed the latest update on her will. The screen blinked to life. She was in the kitchen, her hair pulled back in a neat twist, a wine glass by her elbow. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of the dining table, already extended, a fall centerpiece in place. "Looks lovely," I said before I could stop myself. Oh, thanks, she said, adjusting the angle of the laptop. Ben's parents might come by, actually. Just for dessert. Not confirmed. I nodded. We're trying to keep it really manageable this year. No pressure, no chaos. Just peace, you know? I nodded again, though this time I felt it more in my throat than in my neck. Joanna smiled brightly. Anyway, enough about that. How are you? I looked around my kitchen. The counter was clean, the chairs all tucked in. The cranberry pie recipe, my mother's handwriting, delicate and flour-dusted, peeked from beneath the fruit bowl. I'm fine, I said. Thinking of baking, actually. Oh, Mom, don't go to all that trouble, Joanna said. You really don't have to. No trouble at all, I murmured. It's just tradition. She tilted her head, the way she used to as a teenager, when she wanted to seem sweet while saying no. Well, she said, just make sure you don't overdo it, okay? I won't, I said. The conversation drifted after that, shallow and brief. I told her about a book I was reading. She recommended a new show. We said our good nights. After she hung up, I sat in the glow of the screen for a moment longer, watching the reflection of my own face, older than I remembered. Still, then I stood, moved to the cupboard, and began pulling ingredients down one by one. The first dismissal wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It came dressed in politeness and smoothed over with words like manageable, peaceful, low-key. It came with a chuckle and a sip of wine and a voice that didn't mean to wound. But it did, because it told me, quietly, that my place was no longer at the table. My pie could be welcome, but not my presence. And somewhere between the dough and the sugar, the silence and the smile, I felt the shape of that empty chair forming, long before Thanksgiving ever arrived. I used to set 2 places at the table, even when I was alone. It started after my husband died, a habit I couldn't shake. I'd pour tea into the second cup and let it sit across from mine, steam curling up like conversation. But over time, even the cup stayed in the cupboard. Now it's just one plate, one fork, one glass. The same chair, the same corner. I don't even sit at the center of the table anymore. I eat at the edge, near the window. Less distance to carry the plate, less illusion to maintain. I still make the bed every morning, smoothing the blanket down with the same careful hand I used to use on Henry's fevered forehead. Still fold the top sheet, even though no one sees it. But lately, the house feels like a stage I'm no longer performing on, only sweeping between acts, waiting for someone else's scene to begin. The days bleed into each other in quiet ways. Toast at 7 how, dishes by 7:30. Mail at noon, mostly catalogs and coupons I don't need. A walk around the block if the weather is kind, which it hasn't been. I pass by neighbors sometimes, but they don't wave like they used to. Or maybe I don't raise my hand fast enough anymore. Maybe it's me who's blurred. In the evenings, I make dinner. Small meals now, simple things. But every night, I still reach for the good plate. The one with the tiny chip near the edge. My mother's china. I've used it every day since she passed, partly out of reverence, partly because it makes the food feel like it matters. But lately, it feels too heavy. Sometimes I just eat from a paper plate and leave the sink untouched. Sometimes I stare at the pie dish on the counter, the same one I washed days ago, and think, why bother? But I bake anyway. I bake because it's the one thing I still know how to do with certainty. A pie has rules. You follow them, and you get something warm. Something that fills the house with smell, with memory. Last Tuesday, Joanna called again. She asked if I could pick up a package that had been delivered to my house by mistake. Oh, and Mom, she added, like an afterthought. Ben's mom's bringing her famous stuffing this year. You remember it, right? I did. Too sweet. Too dry. But I nodded into the phone. I think the kids just really connect with her these days, Joanna said. She's been helping with their school projects and such. It's nice for them to have that stability. I almost said, I helped with every science fair until Henry turned 12. I sewed every Halloween costume you wore until your hands learned how to use scissors. But I didn't. I just said, that's nice, dear. The pie dish sat in the sink beside me, damp and waiting. I hadn't had the heart to dry it. The next morning, I stood in the living room, holding an old photo I'd found in the junk drawer. Thanksgiving, maybe 15 years ago. The table was crowded. Arms were wrapped around shoulders. My hair was still dark then, and Henry had braces. And there, at the center of the table, the pie. Same dish, same crust, same crimped edge I made with my knuckle and thumb. I stared at it until the edges of the photo curled with the warmth of my hand. Then I set it on the counter, next to the pie dish. One image frozen. One object still here. That dish. It had become more than bakeware. It had become proof that I had once been part of something. The day before Thanksgiving, I went to the store again. I didn't need anything, not really, but I wandered the aisles slowly, touching the labels on spices, picking up apples and setting them back down. There was a couple in front of me at checkout, young. She was pregnant, glowing. He kissed her cheek while she paid. I looked down at my cart, just milk and nutmeg. The cashier didn't make small talk. When I got home, I took the pie dish from the drying rack and set it carefully on the counter, preheated the oven, measured everything by memory, kneaded, rolled, zested, folded. And as I pressed the crust into the dish, I realized I didn't know who I was baking it for anymore. Not for Joanna, she'd asked me not to. Not for Henry, he was bringing rolls. Not for the grandkids, they'd eat what was served to them and forget the difference. I was baking it for the person I used to be. The woman whose kitchen was once the heart of the family. The woman whose pies meant something. After it cooled, I left the dish on the counter and covered it with a clean towel. The ticking clock reminded me it was almost dinner time. But I didn't set the table. I didn't warm the rolls, or light the candle, or fold the napkin. I just poured myself a glass of water and sat in the armchair. Held the photo again. Touched the chip in the plate I used last night. The one no one else will ever use again. And I thought, not for the first time, is this what disappearing feels like? Not being shouted out, not being scolded or slammed or told to leave. Just replaced. Quietly, efficiently. Softened by words like, we're keeping it small, and you understand, right? But I don't understand. Not really. I used to be the center of the holiday. Not the center in the way people fight to be. Loud, attention-seeking, arms raised in a story no one asked for. No, I was the quiet center. The one who made things hold. You don't realize you're that person until the noise you use to anchor drifts away. Until the pie dish, once surrounded by eager hands, sits untouched on a counter that no longer feels like it belongs to a family. But I remember. It was the Thanksgiving of 2009, the year Joanna brought Ben home for the first time. He was shy, stiff in the shoulders, trying too hard. Wore a navy sweater with a price tag still clinging to the seam. He called me Mrs. Campbell, even though I told him 3 times, Mary's fine. The house was full that year. Henry had flown in from Seattle. Emma was still tiny then, a toddler wobbling around in footy pajamas, dragging a toy turkey behind her by the wing. The air was thick with warmth, oven heat, cinnamon, and the sound of 2 conversations overlapping. The windows steamed from inside. I remember the snap of the pie crust as I lifted it from the dish, that perfect clean edge that only came out right when I wasn't trying too hard. Joanna had laughed, really laughed, when Henry stole the first bite before dinner, burning his tongue and swearing softly while Emma mimicked him with a grin. The house was alive. It buzzed, every corner humming with motion and love. I was wearing my yellow apron, the one with the faded sunflowers, smudged with flour, but tied neat at the waist. The pocket still held the thermometer and a note from Emma that said, "I love your pie the most." I pinned it to the fridge with the magnet shaped like a duck. It stayed there for years. After the meal, everyone drifted to the living room. I remember standing alone in the kitchen, the kind of alone that feels full, not empty. The kind of alone where your hands are still moving, clearing plates, scraping leftovers, wrapping foil, but your heart is content because the house is still echoing. Joanna had turned back before she joined the others, leaned against the doorframe and said, "Mom, yes?" She smiled. That real kind, the one that lifts your whole face. "Thank you. It was perfect." And then, just before she left the room, she added, "It never feels like Thanksgiving until I taste your pie." Those words, they stuck. I wrote them down later, in the back of the recipe card. It's still there, in faint pencil beneath the baking time. That same card sits in my kitchen drawer today, edges curled, stained in places. A faint tear where the ink ran, once after my hand dripped water across the corner. The handwriting is my mother's. Slanted cursive, the old kind people don't learn anymore. It's the only recipe I don't need to read, but I still take it out every year, just to see it, just to hold the paper, remember the weight of legacy and sugar and belonging. I took it out again this morning, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to hear her voice in my head again, saying, "Don't rush the zest, Mary. Let it sit in the sugar a bit. It wakes it up." There's a photo from that 2009 Thanksgiving. It's in a wooden frame in the hallway. I passed it yesterday, dusted it with the hem of my sleeve. We're all there, everyone. Me in the center, the pie in front of me. Joanna to my right, Henry holding Emma on his lap. Ben has his hand on Joanna's shoulder, a little unsure still, but already folding in. There's foil-wrapped rolls in a basket. The good china. You can see the steam rising from the sweet potatoes. Everyone's leaning toward each other. It looks like a portrait of gravity. And for once, I was the thing they orbited. That was the last year I didn't have to ask what time to arrive. Now, the photo stays on the wall. The frame tilts slightly to the left, the nail loosening behind the plaster. I fix it every few weeks. Not because I think they'll look at it when they visit, they don't, but because I need to remember that once, for one afternoon, they leaned in toward me, not out of obligation, not because I had baked, but because I was still seen. And now I bake the same pie, I use the same dish, But there is no Emma in the kitchen asking to lick the spoon. No Henry stealing a slice while pretending not to. No Joanna glancing back over her shoulder to say thank you. Only the recipe card. Only the photo. Only me. And the pie dish, the same one from that day, still chipped on the underside, still warm when I press it to my palm. It feels heavier now. Not from the ingredients, but from everything it remembers. The night before Thanksgiving, I laid out my blouse. Soft green cotton with a row of mother-of-pearl buttons. The one Joanna once said brought out my eyes. I pressed it with care, even though I hadn't worn it in over a year. It still smelled faintly of lavender sachet from the drawer. Still fit, mostly. I didn't know why I did it. There was no invitation, no last-minute change of plans, but something in me, some stubborn, foolish, living part, whispered, maybe. Maybe they'd call. Maybe someone would remember the tradition. Maybe Henry would say, "Come anyway, Ma." Maybe Joanna would send a text with a time and an address and a smiling emoji to make it seem light. Maybe they'd forget to keep me excluded. Hope doesn't need logic. It only needs a crack in the silence. So I left the blouse on the bed, set out my shoes beneath it, folded a clean napkin and placed it by the pie, just in case. At 9:37 p.m., my phone buzzed. I startled, truly startled, the sound so out of place in the hush of the living room. The screen lit up with a name, Joanna. I stared at it for a moment, heart racing the way it used to when Arthur walked in early from work and kissed the back of my neck without a word. I answered on the second ring. "Hi, Mom," she said brightly, too brightly. "Hi, sweetheart." There was background noise, clinking dishes, distant laughter. "I just wanted to wish you a happy early Thanksgiving," she said. "We'll be running around all day tomorrow, so I figured I'd call now." "Oh," I said softly. "Well, that's thoughtful of you." She didn't hear the hesitation, or if she did, she moved past it. "Everyone's starting to arrive," she said. "Ben's folks got here this afternoon. They're in the guest room." "Lovely," I said, my eyes flicking to the hallway where I'd turned down the bed hours ago, out of habit. "The kids are wired," she laughed. "You know how they get. I think they're more excited for pie than presents this year." Something lifted in my chest. I held my breath a moment before saying gently, "Well, I did bake the cranberry pie." A pause. "Oh, Mom," she said, her voice softening. "I told you not to worry about that." "I know, but it wouldn't feel right if I didn't." There was a rustle, and then a muffled voice. Ben, probably, asking where the wine opener was. "I should go," Joanna said. "They're calling me." "Of course," I said quickly. "Of course." She didn't say goodbye, just, "Love you." And the line went dead. I held the phone in my lap. The screen went dark. Outside, wind shook the leaves from the trees in bursts that reminded me of laughter. Brief, careless, gone. I sat there for a long while, blinking at the silence. Then I rose, walked back to the bedroom, and hung the blouse back in the closet. Thanksgiving morning came cold and silver. I still woke at 6, same as always. The sun was slow, and the kitchen window was fogged from the warmth of the oven. I wore my house sweater, the one with the stretched sleeves and the small coffee stain near the cuff. Poured coffee, sat at the table, looked at the pie. It sat on the counter, glowing faintly in the morning light. I had tied a ribbon around the foil, not fancy, just neat. A soft burgundy one I found in the sewing drawer. It looked dignified. Quiet. At noon, The group text arrived from Joanna's number. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. So thankful for this beautiful life. I stared at it. 8 recipients. No name, no hi mom, no invitation, just general. I replied with a turkey emoji. That felt like enough. No one responded. At one eyes, I lit the candle. Just one. Placed it in the center of the small table. Set one plate, folded one napkin, poured water into the crystal glass, and I carried the pie to the center of the table, like it still meant something. For a moment, just one breath of a moment, I looked at the empty chair across from mine and imagined it full. Henry's elbows on the table, Joanna brushing crumbs off the tablecloth, Emma asking for a second slice. I could almost feel them. Almost. I sat down, cut a slice, took a bite. Still perfect. Still mine. After I cleared the plate, I opened my phone again. Not to call, not to text, just to scroll, just to look. That's when I saw it. The photo. Joanna, smiling, flanked by family. Her dining table crowded with food, with faces, with warmth. A pie, my pie, front and center, labeled with my handwriting. And that's when the hope, that small flickering thing I'd held in my chest all week, quietly blew out. Not with anger, not with a sob, just a breath, a blink, a pause long enough to understand. I blew out the candle, but I didn't stand up. I just sat there, still holding the knife in my hand, the old wooden-handled one with the darkened groove where my thumb always presses. It hovered above the last piece of pie on my plate, untouched, half-shadowed by the flickering flame that had just vanished. The kitchen was dim. The light outside had gone blue, that heavy hour where afternoon forgets to become evening. The pie dish sat in the center of the table, still warm at the edges, still perfect, still useless. And me? I sat in the silence, feeling every inch of my body in ways I hadn't before. My spine pressing against the back of the chair, one knee throbbing faintly, the cold of the tile floor creeping through the soles of my socks. But mostly, I felt tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind of tired that makes you fold inside yourself, slow and small, like something trying not to be seen. I looked at the chair across from me, the empty one, not just unoccupied, empty, because it wasn't about one holiday. It was the pattern, the drift, the slow fade from we need you to we forgot you were there. And I let it happen, smiled through it, said, I understand, more times than I could count, even when I didn't. Because what's the alternative? Ask for love? Ask to be seen. No one likes a woman who reminds them of the years, of what's owed, of what's lost. I picked up the pie dish. Still warm, still heavy. I wrapped the remaining slices in foil, careful not to smudge the label with my name. My mother's handwriting, faint, looping letters, looked back at me from the recipe card I'd taped to the top, as if she, too, were watching. I carried it to the front door, opened it, felt the sharp bite of November air against my cheeks, placed the pie on the porch bench. No note, no explanation, just left it there, for no one in particular. Maybe someone would take it. Maybe not. It didn't matter. What mattered was that it no longer belonged in the house. Not when the people it was meant for had already eaten it at a different table. I came back inside and turned off the kitchen light. Let the dim hold me, the hum of the refrigerator, the click of the heater, the world shrinking to small sounds. I wandered the hallway, past the photo of that long-ago Thanksgiving, past the framed cross-stitch that reads, "Bless this house," in uneven thread. And then I stopped in front of the hallway mirror. I hadn't looked in it in a while. Not properly. What I saw startled me, not the gray. Not the lines. I knew those. I earned them. It was the expression. Still, unreadable. Like a woman waiting in a doctor's office after the nurse says, "The doctor will be in shortly," and then never returns. I touched the glass, fingertips leaving faint marks in the dust. No warmth came back. That was the symbol. That was the moment. Not the pie. Not the empty table. This mirror. This reflection. This woman I used to know. I walked back to the kitchen and sat down in the chair again, this time without the knife, without the plate. Just me, hands folded, palms warm from holding nothing. The candle's wick smoked faintly in the center of the table. That small curl of ash and air, rising, fading. I watched it disappear. The house was dark now, not fully. A few lamps still glowed faintly, but the kind of dim that makes everything look like memory. I sat still, letting the silence settle, letting it fill all the places where conversation should have been. The pie was gone. The candle had burned down to a nub. The chair across from mine stood untouched. For a long time, I didn't move. I just breathed. Slowly. Felt my own breath move through the quiet, like something foreign, like it didn't quite belong here. The photo on the wall, the one from 2009, caught a sliver of light from the hallway. It looked crooked again. I always straighten it. Always. But tonight, I didn't. Instead, I rose slowly from the table, my knees stiff, the joints speaking in soft protests. I walked to the sink and rinsed my glass. Dried it carefully. Placed it back in the cupboard beside its twin. The second one I never use anymore. I paused with the cupboard open, stared at that other glass, the one I used to set out for Arthur, then for company, then for the memory of company. And without thinking, I reached in and took it down, set it on the counter beside mine. 2 glasses, side by side. It didn't mean anything yet, but it might. I wandered down the hallway again, stopped in front of the mirror. Same face, same woman, but something in the eyes had shifted, not brighter, not stronger, just steadier. I touched the glass again, and this time, instead of pulling my hand back, I pressed my palm flat against it. Cool, solid, real. I stood there for a long time, just looking. And I whispered, not aloud, not quite, just inside myself. I'm still here. I turned back to the kitchen. That's when I saw it, the pie dish, empty now, just crumbs clinging to the corners. The foil tucked neatly beside it. I picked it up and turned it in my hands. The chip on the underside, familiar and smooth from years of washing, pressed into my thumb. It used to bother me, that imperfection. I always told myself I'd get a new one, a better one, but I never did. Because this one still worked. This one had history. This one had me in it. I placed it back on the counter, not in the cabinet, not hidden. Out in the open. Let it be seen. Something small shifted in me then. Not a plan, not a decision, but a knowing. A quiet, firm knowing that I wouldn't keep setting a table for ghosts. That I wouldn't keep shrinking to fit inside other people's comfort. If I wasn't welcome at their table, I would make my own. Even if it was small. Even if it was just me. I would make it anyway. I sat down again at the kitchen table, not out of habit this time, but choice. And I reached for the small notepad by the phone, the one I use for grocery lists and doctor appointments. I turned to a blank page, wrote a single sentence. You're welcome at my table. Always. Then I set the pen down. And for the first time all day, I smiled. Just a little. Just enough. The morning after Thanksgiving, the sun broke through the trees with a gentleness I hadn't seen in days. It painted the floor in long stripes of light, warm and golden, stretching across the kitchen like an invitation. I stood in the doorway in my house sweater and slippers, holding a warm mug of tea, the kind I save for good mornings, cinnamon and orange peel. The scent alone made me feel like something was beginning. The pie dish was gone. I hadn't expected a note, and there wasn't one. Just an empty space on the bench where I'd left it. But something about that absence. It didn't feel hollow. It felt like movement. Like the world had acknowledged me, even if it didn't know how to say thank you. And that was enough. After breakfast, I pulled the old coat from the back of the hall closet. Olive wool with the mended cuff and the missing button I keep meaning to replace. I slipped it on, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and reached for the bread bag I'd filled with stale crusts the night before. Not for the children this time. Not for the neighbors. For the birds. I stepped out into the crisp air, each breath turning white in the morning light. The wind carried the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves, and the trees, bare now, swayed like slow dancers in the distance. At the park, the usual bench was waiting, peeling paint, a little crooked, but facing the sun. I sat down, opened the paper bag, and crumbled a slice into my palm. The pigeons came first, brave, fluttering close. Then a sparrow, a squirrel, curious but cautious. I tossed the crumbs gently, slowly, watching them scatter and gather again. And for a while, that was all there was. Me, the birds, the morning. A child's voice interrupted the hush. Small, curious. Happy Thanksgiving, lady. I turned. A little girl, no more than 5, stood by the path with a mitten in her mouth, and her father trailing behind. I smiled. And to you, sweetheart. She ran off giggling, and the father gave me a polite nod. But the girl looked back once, waved again. It was enough. It filled something inside me. Not a hole exactly. A quiet space that had been waiting. Back home, I slipped off my coat and placed the empty bread bag in the recycling bin. Then I walked to the answering machine. The red light was blinking. Just once. I pressed play. Hi, Grandma. It's me. I missed you yesterday. It wasn't the same. It was Henry's son, Sam, 17 now. His voice deeper, softer, like he wasn't sure how much he was allowed to say. They said you were busy, but I wish you were there. I saved you a seat. I didn't cry. I just stood there, one hand still resting on the counter as his voice filled the room like a warm tide. Like a gentle, late apology the world didn't know it owed. I pressed the button again. Let it play twice, then once more. Then I reached into the drawer and pulled out a blank note card, the kind with the watercolor leaves on the front. I wrote, Dear Sam, that meant more than you'll ever know. I missed you too. Love always, Grandma. Then below that, I added it. You're welcome at my table. Always. That evening, the house was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. Not hollow, not cold. Still. Chosen. I stood in the hallway, holding the printed photo, the one I'd seen on Instagram, the one where they all smiled, forks raised, my pie in the center of the table I wasn't invited to. I'd printed it at the pharmacy, the kind of impulsive errand that feels both painful and necessary. Glossy paper, 4 or 6, crisp edges. I studied it under the soft lamplight. Joanna's children sat where mine once had. Ben raised a glass. The stuffin', not mine, was heaped in a ceramic bowl I'd given them years ago. And there, beside the candles, my cranberry pie. Whole, proud, belonging, even if I didn't. I turned the photo over, wrote nothing on the back. I had nothing left to explain. Instead, I walked down the hall and opened the linen closet. Behind the extra towels and the holiday table runners I no longer used, I reached for an old shoebox. Faded blue, the lid soft from age. Lifting it open, I revealed what I'd kept. An old birthday card from Emma with backward letters. The church bulletin from Arthur's memorial. A paper turkey traced from Sam's little hand when he was 4. My mother's recipe card, the original, folded into a slip of wax paper. And now, the photo. I folded it in half, gently, at the center. A clean crease through the smiling faces and the polished table. Then I tucked it inside the box, right next to the card from Emma. I reached for a small label I'd made long ago and wrote a single word across it. Truths. I pressed the label to the box's lid. Then I slid the box behind the yearbooks on the top shelf, not hidden in shame, but stored like a season past, because that's what it was. Not a grudge, not a wound, just something I no longer needed to hold out in the open. I returned to the kitchen. The pie dish, clean and dry, sat on the counter. I lifted it, felt its familiar weight in my hands, and placed it back in the cabinet. But this time I set it beside the second glass, the one I'd taken down yesterday. 2 objects, side by side, waiting, not for invitation, but for use. I reached for the notepad by the phone again, tore off the page where I'd written to Sam, folded it once, then I pulled a stack of blank cards from the drawer. Stationery I'd nearly forgotten I had, the kind with pressed leaves and soft edges, and I began to write. Dear Marlene, it's been too long. I hope you're well. If you ever find yourself nearby, you're welcome at my table. Always. To Clara, remember that Thanksgiving in '83? I found a photo. Made me think of you. You're welcome at my table. Always. Mr. Jenkins, thank you for fixing my porch light last spring. You're welcome at my table. Always. Card by card. Name by name. Not out of desperation. Not to fill a seat, but because I had stopped asking for permission to belong. I folded each card carefully, stacked the envelopes neatly, and set them beside the dish where I once left only silence. In the morning, I'd mail them, but tonight I lit a new candle. No centerpiece, no ceremony, just a flame, soft and steady, and I sat at my table, not waiting, just being, and that was enough. The cards were mailed by noon. I walked to the post office with steady steps, the envelopes bundled neatly under my arm, tied with a ribbon that matched the one from the pie. Burgundy, the color of endings that feel like beginnings. The clerk recognized me, called me by name, and asked if I had holiday plans. I'm keeping it simple this year, I said, and I meant it. She smiled, handed me the receipt, and wished me a warm afternoon. Outside, the air was brisk, but the sun was soft. I walked home the long way, past the park, past the schoolyard, where fallen leaves danced like children across the pavement. Each step felt lighter, not because the weight was gone, but because I had finally set it down. At home, the table was clear. No folded napkin, no crystal glass, just the pie dish on the drying rack, turned upside down, catching the light in its curved glass. I walked past it, into the living room, sat in the armchair with a soft blanket over my knees, the one Joanna had given me years ago, back when gifts still felt personal. I held a fresh note card in my lap, blank, possibility, and I thought about everything I had kept, not in drawers or closets, but in myself. All those years of carving turkeys, tying aprons, soothing tantrums, mending tears no one else noticed. All the moments I caught, remembered, folded into the corners of my heart like linen. I had thought that being forgotten was the same as being erased. But now, sitting here, warm, calm, complete, I understood. I was not gone. I had simply stepped out of the role they assigned me, and into the one I chose. The phone didn't ring that afternoon. No apologies, no last-minute invitations. But the mailbox held something unexpected, a small envelope scrawled with a familiar hand. From Sam. Inside, a thank you card. Simple, plain. But at the bottom, in thick black ink, were 5 words. Next year, I'm coming over. I held the card to my chest, closed my eyes, and I smiled. That night, as the sun slipped behind the trees, I lit a single candle. Set it on the windowsill, just behind the glass where the pie had once cooled. The flame flickered against the pane, soft and steady, reflecting itself again and again in the old dish beside it. The same dish, chipped, used, loved. I sat by the glow, hands folded, eyes calm, breath steady, not waiting, not wishing, just being. And in the quiet, I whispered it once more, for myself, for anyone who needed to hear it, for the person I'd almost forgotten. You're welcome at my table, always,